So today I wanted to explore the Hodayot, also known as the Thanksgiving hymns, one of the most theologically rich texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls. These hymns come from the Qumran community and provide rare insight into how this group understood themselves, their relationship to God, and their place within Israel's sacred history. So my central argument is this. The Hodayot reinterprets Old Testament scripture in order to construct and preserve a distinctive communal identity, presenting the Qumran community as the divinely chosen sons of light who already participate in heavenly worship and divine transformation. So to make this case, I will briefly introduce the Hodayot as a primary source, outline the key theological themes and works from the Old Testament, and show how scholarly research supports this interpretation. So the Hodayot is a collection of hymns found primarily in Cave 1 at Qumran. Unlike biblical psalms meant for Israel as a whole, these hymns appear to have been written by and for a specific community, functioning as public liturgical expressions of identity rather than private prayers. Scholars such as Ebert Kitchigdalar emphasize that these texts were carefully composed, preserved, and performed, not just casually written devotional pieces. The hymns consistently use communal language like we, suggesting that worship itself was a mechanism for shaping and reinforcing the group's self-understanding. So the Hodayot builds Qumran's identity by reinterpreting Old Testament themes in four major ways. First, creation and human humility. Second, spiritual transformation and predestination. Third, salvation, resurrection, and exaltation. Four, heavenly liturgy, leadership, and suffering. So each of these themes is rooted in Old Testament tradition, but reshaped to serve the Qumran community's unique theological worldview. First, the Hodayot draws heavily on creation language, especially imagery associated with Genesis 2. So although the hymns never directly quote such as Genesis 2 verse 8, they repeatedly refer to humans as creatures of clay and netted with water. As one of my authors, John Patrick O'Connor, notes, this direct allusion shows how deep engagement with biblical creation theology without relying on just verbatim citation. This language emphasizes humility and dependence on God, but also sets the stage for spiritual transformation. The hymns describe how God, through his Spirit, reshapes and purifies the elect members of the community. Importantly, this transformation is not universal. It is reserved for those inside the Qumran community. This reflects a strong belief in predestination, reinforcing the idea that the community alone has been chosen for divine renewal. So another key reinterpretation involves salvation and resurrection. The Hodayot frequently describe, being lifted from Sheol or rescued from the pit. While similar language in the Old Testament often points to future hope, the Hodayot present salvation as something already occurring. The hymns suggest that God has already elevated the community spiritually, granting them insight and status unmatched by outsiders. This help portrays why the group identify themselves as the sons of light. Their identity is not merely hopeful or symbolic, it is portrayed as a present spiritual reality. The hymns also blur the boundary between heaven and earth. The Qumran community understands its worship as participating in the worship of heavenly beings. Phrases like host of the holy ones and congregation of the children of heaven suggest that communal liturgy aligns earthly worship with the divine realm. This identity is reinforced through leadership figures such as the Maskil and the teacher of righteousness. One of the other authors, Carol Newsom, argues that the first person, quote-unquote, I, in many hymns likely represents these leaders, positioning themselves as divinely inspired interpreters of Scripture, comparable to figures like Moses. Leadership, therefore, becomes another reinterpretation of Old Testament models, reshaped to support Qumran community authority and guidance. And finally, the Hodayot reframes suffering and persecution. Drawing on lament traditions from the Psalms, the hymns portray illness, oppression, and threat not as signs of abandonment, but as evidence of divine election and purification. Suffering becomes proof that the community truly belongs to God, further distinguishing them from the outside world. So in conclusion, the Hodayot does far more than just echo Old Testament ideas, it reimagines them. By reshaping creation theology, salvation, leadership, worship, and suffering, the Qumran community used Scripture to define who they were and why they mattered. The Hodayot demonstrates that Scripture was not merely inherited, but actively interpreted to sustain identity, authority, and purpose. And through these hymns, the Qumran community declared themselves participants in God's ongoing story as a people chosen and transformed.